So a few months back, my dad was cleaning out his garage at his house, and he came across a couple of boxes of pictures, report cards, like old trophies, stuff like that. And so he gave it to me, and it's been gathering dust in my closet for, I don't know, 6 months now. And with everything going on right now, have nothing else to do, I decided it'd be a good idea to take a look through it. And what I was surprised to find is a lot of pictures that I haven't really ever seen since they were taken. And they were from a time in my life that I have really fond memories of. And I'd like to share a story with you from that time in my life. Specifically, it's a story about me and my mom. So we have to go back about 20 years. It would have been the late 90s, early 2000s. Basically, I was still rocking Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. I never picked sides. So at that time, my family had just undergone a pretty massive change. We had uprooted our lives from our tiny rural Georgia town and moved all the way down to the Orlando, Florida area. So just me, my mom, and my dad, about 7 hours from our hometown. Saying it out loud now, it sounds like it would be a pretty traumatic time for a little boy like me who was so quiet and reserved. But honestly, I still find myself thinking about that time quite often. Okay, hang on. So, I know I said this was a story about me and my mom, but before we go on, I need to talk a little bit about the history of Orlando's water parks. It's relevant-ish to my story context-wise, and honestly, I think it's pretty interesting. So believe it or not, the water park as we know it today didn't really exist on a mainstream level until 1977. That's the year that the founder of SeaWorld, George Millay, opened Wet 'n Wild in Orlando. The park wasn't a smash hit right out of the gate, but it did eventually go on to become the busiest water park in the US for quite a while, held that title until the late 90s. Coincidentally, that's around the time that Millay sold the rights to Universal, and if you're looking to go today, well, you can't. I'm sorry. It was destroyed in 2016, and Universal replaced it with Volcano Bay, which is very cool, very flashy by all accounts. And if you're wondering what unseated the granddaddy of water parks, and then you guessed Disney, well, you'd be right. Typhoon, Lagoon, and Blizzard Beach opened in 1989 and 1995 respectively, and surpassed Wet 'n Wild's attendance records by 1999, and never looked back. They basically took Millay's formula of slapping all the best rides together and then put a nice Disney polish on it, threw in some characters that kids can meet for good measure, and boom, there you go. To be honest though, I had heard so little about these parks since my time as a Florida resident. I honestly just assumed that they had gone the way of Wet 'n Wild, but that is very much not the case. In fact, last year they both averaged over 2 million visitors, and they are the second and third busiest water parks in the world. So, still going, and I'm sure you're thinking, oh well, something Disney, still popular. Well, honestly, I have to agree with the crowds on this one, which, hey, brings us back to our story. Okay, so to get to the point, I want to narrow it down to one summer in particular, and it's probably the summer of my childhood that sticks out more than any other, honestly. So we had moved to Florida so that my dad could take a good job with a company there, and that summer, he was away almost every weekend playing in a business golf tournament thing. I don't know, just classic early 2000s business dad stuff. I'm fuzzy on the details, but you get the point. So that left my poor mom alone to deal with me and my frosted tips. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think I was a pretty good kid, but if you've ever spent really any amount of time around an 8-year-old boy, you'll know that it eventually becomes a, oh my god, we have to get you out of this house situation. And my mom did that by basically spoiling the hell out of me. Fancy dinners at Outback. I think we saw Shrek opening weekend, and I think she even watched a Tony Hawk instructional video all the way through with me to help me learn how to ollie. She really pulled out all the stops. It's awesome. But really, there was one sunny day activity in my mind that stands above the rest. Water parks. I told you it would be relevant. So yeah, weather permitting, my mom would take advantage of those really nice Florida resident ticket prices, slather my pasty white skin with sunscreen, and then brave Orlando traffic to go to one of those previously mentioned water parks. So now is a good time to mention that as a kid, I had a pretty severe fear of heights. I still have it now, but, I had it then as well. So that meant my mom made the ultimate sacrifice because I was much more of a lazy river wave pool kind of kid. There was one slide in particular at Wet n Wild that basically has a mythological like status in my memory. It was called the Bombay. This thing might as well have reached like above the clouds because the idea of the floor dropping out from under you and then falling onto a near vertical slide, just too much for my 8-year-old brain to handle. So that meant my poor mom did not get to ride that ride either. I'm sorry, Mama. But you know, that's probably why the 2 Disney water parks stick out more in my memory. If you've never been there, I guess the best way to describe it is basically like a Disney cartoon come to life. And then, you know, with water slides. I mean, even now, as an adult who, you know, really tries to avoid direct sunlight as much as possible, the nostalgia factor hits me pretty hard. It makes me want to be back there again. And you know, I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of kids, would have rather have been there with their friends, but honestly, yeah, that wasn't me. It was just me and my mom, and man, I thought that was awesome. You know, floating down the lazy river, body surfing in the wave pool, riding those 2-person inner tube slides. That's what defines that summer. That's what makes it stand out so vividly in my memory. And you know, a lot of people like to refer back to a simpler time in their lives, and for me, that was the simpler time. It was just me, my mom, and water parks. My parents were pretty young when they had me, so to me, that meant I had the young, fun, hip parents, and they were, but it also meant that they were growing. Just as I was going through my childhood and growing up, they were growing into the people they were going to be, you know, the adults they were going to be. And I think that makes so many of my childhood memories a little bit more special, especially like that summer that we spent adventuring across Orlando. My mom was around the same age that I am now, which is crazy because I barely feel like an adult. And she had me, you know, she had a kid, she had an 8-year-old boy she had to take care of. And she had also just uprooted her life and, you know, started over at a new job where she didn't know anybody. And she took all of that time to make just the most kick-ass summer for me that I'm still talking about today. And like I said, it was a simpler time for me, but it was a point in her life when most people are just starting to get their acts together, you know? And she was just being the best mom that a dorky kid like me could ask for. So all I want to say is this. Thank you, Mama. Thank you for that summer and everything and, you know, whatever's to come. Just thank you. And happy Mother's Day. I love you.